Hello everybody, this is Pandit Jagannath. So this is the first of a series which I'm planning on doing, trying to go in depth with the characters from Mahabharata. I haven't seen anything like this done. I plan on these being quite extensive. I do have some knowledge on the subject matter, so I'm planning on going quite in depth with the majority of the major characters with as much information as is available to me. This is not something which is going to be made up. So first, I want to start a little bit about me. First things first, I'm not a Swami. The closest thing you could call me is a Bhakta. And I have a lot of emotional response to these stories. I was raised in this tradition. I'm not Indian, but I'm definitely a Hindu. My parents were converted into Vaishnavism before I was born, so I was raised with deities and a lot of the tropes, let's say, of Hinduism. So when I read these stories, when I tell these stories, you're going to find that I tend to laugh, I cry, all the different bhavas, the emotions, they come up in me. So if you're expecting some kind of stone-faced recitation of these stories, you're not going to get it. The second thing is I am just a mortal man, so I'm also quite intelligent, so I do tend to curse sometimes. And the other thing is I'm not telling these stories for little kids. I don't want you to pop your 5-year-old in front of this because, first of all, these stories aren't meant for kids. It's really sickening and saddening to me that they just reserve these stories for little kids because what they end up doing is taking away a lot of the importance of what these stories are for. These are for grown men. These are for warriors. These stories are at least, the very least, for student life. But they plant it in front of little kids, and so they edit down so much of these stories. Most of the stories that you've been told probably are totally mutated and cut back. So these stories, this is the R-rated version of Mahabharata, okay? I'm not going to hold anything back. You're getting the full deal. So this is my warning ahead of time. I don't want you to plant your little kid here and then I'm telling stories that you don't want them to hear. So you can get that out of the way right now. Something else that I want to address to our Indian listeners is I know that, there's a lot of versions of Mahabharata. And there may be as many versions as there is villages in some cases. I've been telling Mahabharata stories for nearly 20 years now. And the thing is that I always run into people that tell me, oh, my grandma or my grandpa told me this or that. And honestly, and right straightforward, I don't care what your grandma said because I'm going to just tell what's in the actual story. Believe me, I'm giving you the straight deal here. This isn't some kind of manipulation on my part. From the beginning, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to stick to two primary sources. That is the Mahabharata, translated by Kishore Mohan Ganguly, and also the one translated by M.N. Dutt. That's what I'm using as a primary reference point. Okay, any other thing, it's irrelevant to me and to this discussion. Only other source that I'm going to use as a reference to some degree is a Mahabharata commentary by Sripad Madhvacharya entitled Mahabharata Tatpaniranyaya, which basically means what's up with Mahabharata. Now, there's a few good references in there that I'm going to include in these stories that I tell. But that's free. I will note when I tell that, and you can take that or leave that as you will. But this is considered to be one of the greater commentaries on Mahabharata and one of the only ones really in existence as far as let's say, sadhus that talk about Mahabharata that I have access to. So I will include some of those things, but I will leave comments as to if it's his opinion or if it's from the story directly. So you may be wondering why I'm doing this. And the number one reason is honestly the amount of knowledge on the subject matter is becoming less and less and less with each subsequent generation of people. And it's come to the point where I've noticed when I tell stories about Mahabharata, most people just know what they saw on a TV show. And it's quite honestly disgusting to me. So I'm trying to overcome that and to educate people that might be concerned about this. At least to some degree, it's a lot easier to, flip on a YouTube video than to read a book these days. A lot of people aren't reading books. So I want to create something that at least people that have some concern or interest in Hinduism or Mahabharata can have something to go for. Because I'm going to tell you something, I'm not a hippie Krishna. I'm a born and bred die-in-the-wool Hindu, and it's something I would die for. This is not something I do lightly. I understand that there's some forces that don't particularly like Hinduism, and I don't really care because I'm doing something I believe in. If anybody listening to this is of European descent, I'm going to tell you that if you actually look at, with any kind of lack of prejudice, at the parallelisms between the ancient Indo-European cultures, you have to be totally blind not to understand that this was pretty much the religion of all our ancestors as long as you're living in the Eurasian continent. So basically, this is something which got stolen from us by a certain group of people and certain fanatical monotheists that destroyed what our ancient ancestors believed and pretty much stole away from us. And India is the last place where this is functioning and existing to some extent. So it's very important to us that this is continued and not destroyed, because there is forces out there which are trying to destroy it. Something else which I wish to clarify about my approach to doing these in-depth character analysis is there is a kind of pseudo-intellectual tendency to disregard the opinion of the text itself or the culture which it comes from and try and draw some kind of conclusion, hoping to find a truth which is somehow separate from what's trying to be inculcated by the text itself. I am totally opposed to that viewpoint, and I am only going to try and expand upon the truth which is being spoken by the text itself. So also of note is my, let's say, opinion about the historicity of this text. Now, this is what I can say. There's a lot of historical evidence for much of the story, but much of the story has also been added to since that time. And I think another thing which happens is people tend to have an imagination too much about what's going on with this story. Now, if we were to get into a time machine, let's say, and go back 5,200 years ago, would it be exactly as some people would imagine it would look like? To this I can say, honestly, I don't think so. Would it be similar? This I could say, I think, because there is a lot of evidence. They've found Dwarka, they've found other things. So, among all things, this actually has the most, let's say, archaeological evidence to it, much of this stuff. But there's something else which I want to talk about. In this, let's say, almost insane desire to prove that it's true, we also sometimes miss out on some of the deeper meanings which are involved when you look at it in a symbolic way, because these stories are poetry. And poetry is meant to convey emotions and symbology. It's also a history, so it also conveys facts. You have both of these things existing. I'm not one of these small minded people that think if it's not one thing, it has to be the opposite. Sometimes things are both. And in this particular case, it's conveying both symbology and history at the same time. Because what it's trying to do, and I hope you feel and notice, is it's trying to convey something which is beyond reality. That might be a bit much for some people to grasp, but that's the point of these stories. All the Puranas, all the Vedas are meant to transport the mind and consciousness through the via medium of emotion to a transcendental state. That's its purpose, that's its function, and that's my purpose in telling these stories. I hope you haven't found this to be too long-winded, but I just want to be clear about where I'm coming from and where I want to take you so you can listen to this and come to some kind of conclusion about how to digest this information. Thank you very much, and now let's get to the story. So for this character study, I want to talk about Arjuna. So who is Arjuna? What's his story? What's going on with Arjuna? Um, Please do forgive me, some of my Sandhi or pronunciation isn't going to be exact. It might grate some of your ears, but let's get on with the story. So first, what I want to talk about a little bit is Arjuna's names, because in the Vedic tradition, the characters oftentimes have multiple names, and these oftentimes give a deeper understanding of the character. Arjuna is just one of the names that Arjuna goes by. So some of the other names, Arjuna is famous for having 10 names, but there's actually more than that. So let's kind of, go over some of the names that he has. So one of them is Partha. Now, this actually has two translations. One of those is scholarly student, and another one is son of Pritha, because actually his mother, Kunti, was named Pritha, and she was adopted by the king Kunti Bhoj, which is why she was called Kunti. But she was actually the sister to Vasudeva, who is the father of Krishna. So she was born in the Yadavas. But the thing is that she was given over as an adoptive daughter to Kunti Bhoja, because the Bhojas are actually also part of the lunar dynasty and related to the Yadavas. They ruled over that area of Mathura and uh, Vrindavan, and that was the Yadava territory, as well as certain parts of Gujarat. The various kingdoms. Certain number of maps have been produced which show the different uh, overlays of the different kingdoms that these different you know clans used to own and manage. Let's say. Um, so Kunti's actual name when she was born was Pritha. So Partha is a way of saying the son of Pritha, which is a way of identifying him with his mother. Another name is Jishnu, which means unconquerable. This would highlight his more warrior-like abilities. Um, Another name is Kirtan, which means one who wears the celestial crown. There's a story that we're going to get into a little bit later in which Lord Indra, the king of the Devas, Lord Indra fares heavily in the more ancient Vedic stories as a major character. And if you actually read the Ramayana and Mahabharata books alone, then he's actually given more of his due, let's say, from the Vedic perspective. But the farther away you get from that, then you get these kind of stories, or they're making fun of Indra and various other things, which I personally believe are interpolations or added later. Um, so Indra gives Arjuna a crown, which he wears, gives him like celestial kind of power, let's say. Another name is Swetavahana, which means one with shining steeds. This actually refers to a story a little bit earlier on where he is given a group of celestial horses, which may or may not be related to Pegasus of the Greek mythology. They're a kind of celestial horse which is owned by these race of beings called Gandharvas, which are said to be able to fly. And so these horses are given to Arjuna. So he's given the ability. It's not mentioned necessarily that the horses can make his chariot fly, but throughout the stories, the Gandharvas are famed for their flying horses. And so he defeats a Gandharva in battle named Chitrangada. Chitrangada is one of the Parama Upadevas. There's a certain class of beings called Upadeva, which means almost God. Deva would mean God, and Upadeva means almost. So they're kind of higher beings. They're on a more subtle body. The Upadevas are composed primarily of mind, intelligence, and ego, and then they put on their bodies, which are made of flesh, made of the earth, water, fire, air. And they put these bodies on kind of like how when a person goes scuba diving, they put on a suit to go in the water. These beings are primarily made of elements which are not of this earth, but in order to interact in this earth, they put on a kind of covering. And so that's what these beings are. And so the Parama Upadevas are the greatest. Parama means greatest or biggest or most powerful. Parama, powerful. So the greatest, Parama Upadeva, the greatest amongst the Upadevas are these Gandharva kings. The Gandharvas are kinds of beings which one might compare, let's say, to angels. They have wings. They're described as having wings, and of them, the Parama Upadevas are said to have wings that are golden colored. So Chitrangada was one of these Gandharva kings Arjuna encountered in the forest. This Gandharva threw a fire weapon at Arjuna. Arjuna threw a fire weapon at the Gandharva and defeated him. And as a result of defeating him, in order to, ransom his life, he gave Arjuna these horses. So Svetivahana means one who has these white horses or golden steeds. Another name of Arjuna is Bivatsu, which means terrible to behold. Apparently, it's like, when he would fight in battle, his face would become very grim and scary. So that's what Bivatsu means. Vijay means also Vijay means victorious. He's also called Jaya, which means victory. This again would imply Arjuna is a very martial character. According to Madhvacharya, he's considered to be an Amsha of Indra. A lot of times they say he's the son of Indra. Uh, Madhvacharya's assertion is confirmed in the Mahabharata itself. Towards the beginning, Lord Brahma requests the Devas to take birth on the earth by sending their amshas, or partial expansions, or a lot of the translations use the word portions, but that basically means amsha, which is basically like uh, these beings are not made of flesh and blood, so you can send a portion of your energy, just like I can't remove my finger and put it down and it'll crawl around, but for a deva he can remove a part of himself and send it somewhere and it can function on its own. You can take a little bit of your energy. This explains, towards the beginning of the Mahabharata, there's a story in which Yamaraj is cursed to take birth on the earth and become Vidura. So the question becomes, when Kunti summoned Yama to give birth to Yudhisthira, did Vidura show up? No. No, he sent an Amsha. All these things that are being sent are Amshas. So I would consider, based off of the what Madhvacharya says, and also how Lord Brahma asks the Devas in particular to send their Amshas to the earth, that Arjuna would be a portion of Indra. So a lot of this martial energy, Indra is a storm deity, a war deity, a king deity. You might have some connection to Zeus or Thor or any of these other characters. Um, this is also some of the energy which is associated with Indra. So these kinds of Shakti or power is oftentimes associated with Arjuna. So another name is Falguni because Arjuna was born on the full moon day in the month of Falgun, under the star or nakshatra Uttara Falgun. Now in Vedic astrology there's 27 nakshatras which are considered to be the wives of the moon god, and he spends one day with each of them. There's a whole bunch of stories involved with that I could get into, but we're going to try and stay on topic as much as possible. So Uttara Falgun is considered to be a very solid and auspicious nakshatra, which produces very handsome and powerful men, actually, if you were born under that star. You're considered to be somewhat of a playboy or very handsome. The girls like you, for lack of better words. So that actually would correspond. Now, this is a very interesting thing, which I suppose most people don't really recognize or understand. The lunar months, the Vedic calendar is a lunar calendar system. So the thing is that due to the precession of equinox, the dates and times for these are actually adjusted. Uh, because it's a lunar calendar, it's very good for remembering things over a long, extended period of time, because you remember the the moon cycle and the phase of the moon. It's the Tithi, right? And then the moon. Basically, there's two ways of determining the lunar cycle. One is the full moon cycle, and the other is the new moon cycle. Now, the ancient Romans and Greeks, up to the time of Caesar, used to consider the new moon to be the start of the month. In South India, they also consider the new moon to be the start of the month. But other cultures believed that the full moon was the start of the month. But generally, the month system are named after the nakshatra that the full moon is in. So they name the month after that. So the month of Falgun in this time period falls around spring. But 5,000 years ago, it was around Christmas time, or, December 25th, December 24th. that the full moon on the month of Falgun would be. So actually, most people think of Krishna being born in August, but actually he was born sometime in the middle of June, by the solar reckoning. That's a little interesting factoid, I suppose. So another name of oh right, so and the year on that would be Arjuna was born, I'd say, around December, possibly beginning of January, around the year 3221 BC. That's the based off of the dates that are given and the different star patterns that are mentioned. That's the best date that scholars have come up to with the time that Arjuna would be born. Um, okay, so another name that Arjuna goes by is Savyasachi, which basically means ambidextrous or one who can use his bow with two hands. Um, Arjuna was famed for his ability to shoot with the right or the left hand. Ambidexterity is a very useful skill, especially for a fighter. Another name for Arjuna is Dhananjaya. So Donna means wealth. So Dhananjaya, one who conquers wealth, one who is victorious over wealth. This would imply someone, I've seen one of the translation be winner of booty, as in the, which is kind of a more accurate depiction in the sense some people get this kind of grandiose notion, I suppose, about what it is that these Kshatriyas used to do, but basically, Arjuna went around and would tell the people that they had to give tribute or else there would be a war, which is basically the way they used to raise funds back in those days. And he was powerful enough, most people would give the tribute. So this is the way that Dhananjaya got his name, by conquering nations and taking their wealth. He was a real warrior through and through, and this is the kind of hero that is suggested by these stories. These modern interpretations are quite, lame, if you ask me, and lacking of the actual essence of the story. Another name of Arjuna is Gandivi, or one who uses the Gandiva bow. The Gandiva bow was considered to be a celestial weapon. Now, some of these, ancient alien people come up with these preposterous stories saying it's some kind of laser beam or something. It's total bullshit. It's clearly a bow. It was a celestial bow. The thing what most people don't understand is that the kinds of weapons that they're using, it doesn't matter what kind of weapon that you use. If you're using a mantra weapon, you can use a bow and you can conquer modern armies. Some of these weapons that they were using are phenomenal. Gandiva bow was a golden bow that was covered with different kinds of gems of different kinds of hues, in particular orders of. There's a certain kind of science involved with the mystical and energetic properties of gems. And the gems are arranged on the bow in such a way that is fully utilized, especially, and also the metal composition of the bow. There's certain energy outputs that are created by gems, and the metal acts as a almost electrical wire in the sense of transference of energy. There's a science to this stuff, but can't speak too much about it. The Another name that he goes by is Krishna. Now, there's been several interpretations of what this means. Now, some people think that this translates as that he's good friends with Krishna, who was a major character of the story, considered supreme deity by certain people. Um, Another interpretation is that he may have been dark-skinned, like Krishna himself, or Draupadi. Draupadi, his we'll get into who Draupadi is. Most Hindu people would know who Draupadi is. Another one of her names is Krishna, and she was a bluish color, much like Krishna, bluish black. They did find some people in India who do have a bluish black complexion. This could also be a kind of indication of celestial significance. Um, Arjuna may have been this color. There's some various different kinds of understandings of what this interpretation could be. Um, Certain authorities give different interpretations. The name Arjuna itself means white, so some people say that that's a justification for determining he may have been pale-skinned. Um, as far as we know, all the depictions of Indra are of a reddish or tawny-skinned person, and he's considered to be the Amsha, or even Indra's his father, let's say. And his mother Kunti, however, was considered to be very fair-skinned and have extremely dark hair. Now, Arjuna is described having extremely dark hair. I would think, based off of, let's just say, the genetics of Indra and Kunti, I would think he probably would have a more fair complexion. Um, and the name Krishna may indicate simply that he has a friendship with Krishna. But this is my opinion. You can make of that stuff what you will. Um, Gudakesh means conqueror of sleep, and he got this name because um, some people get this kind of interpretation that it means that he never slept. That isn't exactly what it's saying. What it means is he got this name when he was a student, and he used to practice archery at nighttime when everyone else was sleeping. This is how he got the name. Um, there's other kinds of, I suppose some people try and, get other interpretations out of it. That might not necessarily be off the mark, but he definitely got the name by practicing his archery skills while everyone else was sleeping. Um, Kunteya is another name which goes back to Priti, or Partha, which is son of Pritha, and so Kunteya is another name meaning son of Kunti. They oftentimes use these kinds of names in an affectionate sense. Usually between friends, you'll have a kind of a friend name, or sometimes, well, it's not necessarily a daknam. That's a Bengali term where you give a fake name to your baby so people can't curse it. That lets you know how kind of sick it is in that place. Um, uh, but this would be more like, say, a friendly name, kind of like a nickname that you can give a buddy. You call him by his parents. It kind of summons forth a familial kind of affection. Krishna used to use this one a lot, and mostly because they're related through his mother. So Krishna is kind of their maternal, well, not necessarily maternal uncle, but kind of in a sense. He's definitely their cousin. Um, Another name that he has is Mahabahu, or Mahabahu, Mahabahau. There's different ways. I mean, basically it means mighty armed. And while Bhima was definitely, obviously, a lot stronger, Arjuna was no slouch. Um, you know, there's no real physical way of comparing these characters to modern humans. It's the kinds of feats of strength that these people were capable of is it's divine. There's no other way of really comparing that to that. Pandava, son of Pandu. Bharata. This is another common way that he's referred to, which is a way of acknowledging that he's a descendant of a long line of heroes the Mahabharata is, if nothing else, a kind of genealogical odyssey which covers all the generations of the dynasty of that lineage. They're a branch of the lunar dynasty. The Ramayana covers mostly the solar dynasty, while the Mahabharata covers primarily the lunar dynasty. There's also a few other interesting parallels, and reverse parallels, let's say. For example, um, in Ramayana, the major the character obviously is Ram, but the person that helps him, right, in that story is Sugriva, right? So who is he connected to? Is the son, right? And who's the antagonist in that story? That would be none other than Vali, who is connected with Indra. So in Mahabharata, what we find is that who is the main friend or ally with Krishna, and is always depicted, with Krishna in many of the pictures. That would be Arjuna, and who's he associated with? Indra. So who is the antagonist? Would be Karna, right? So, and who's he associated with? Is the Surya. So the roles are reversed between Mahabharata and Ramayana. There's a few other things. One example is used by certain people of the Bhakti school as a reverse, is that, in if you happen to read the Ramayana, when Sita gets stolen, Rama is gushing. I mean, he's crying and thinks he sees Sita in a tree, thinks he sees Sita here, saying he can't live without her. It's pretty sad. It's very sad. It's very heart touching, actually. And the thing is, in the in the stories of Krishna, it's the opposite. It's Krishna's the one who's leaving, and the gopis are crying. Where is he? Where is he? So there's a lot of opposites between the stories, actually. Um, so then another and final name that I want to cover is Indra, which directly means son of Indra or portion of Indra. So I also want to talk a little bit, let's say, about his appearance and personality based off of just some general trends. I mean, you're going to find a lot more about his personality when I get into the more details of the stories. Um, but just a few, let's say, observations uh, in the abstract um, about his personality and his appearance as best we can tell. Arjuna really liked to make vows a lot. you know, Also, he made a vow to kill Karna, he made a vow to kill Bheeshma, he made a vow to kill Ashwatthama, and basically anybody who claimed they were invincible. It's not like he was proud or something, but he was just like really confident, and this is the way in those days they used to kind of, you know, show that they were tough. These were very powerful warriors. Um, he didn't do this, to boast. Um, and he didn't really fight for like bloodlust or anything. He fought because it was the duty, and he had to fulfill his role as a man and as a warrior, and that was the way that they would do that. It wasn't over boastful considering some of the stuff that those people used to say in those battles, but he used to basically let people know don't mess with me. Um, he used to he was a real warrior. He used to go around. He challenged every single kingdom that he went through and asked for winner of asked for their wealth, asked for tribute in the name of Yudhisthira. And in his Dharma, there's a beautiful little section where Arjuna goes up to Yudhisthira and asks permission to go and conquer all the neighboring kingdoms of the world. And Yudhisthira says, "Oh, that is your most important duty as a warrior and the most religious thing that you can do." I think if you were to say that to a modern person, they'd probably freak out. But this was the mindset of the warriors in those days. Due to his age relation to Krishna, him and Krishna were considered peers because they were both born in the same year, um, just different seasons. Krishna in the summer, Arjuna in the winter. Um, he would of all the Pandavas, he spent the most time with Krishna, and they were very close. Bhima and Krishna also had a very close relationship, just different ways. Uh, Krishna and Bhima kind of like partners in crime, let's say, for lack of better words. They play tricks on Draupadi to try and get her to cry and different things like that. There's some when I get into Bhima, we can talk about some of that stuff. Um, but Arjuna used to spend a lot of time with Krishna. They used to hang out a lot. They went to the forest before the whole section where Arjuna fights Agni with Krishna driving the chariot, which is kind of a precursor for the battle of Kurukshetra. Um, they go to this beautiful forest. They set up these tents. They have a whole party. There's all Draupadi and Subhadra are there with Krishna and his queens, and they go camping on a riverbank and doing various kinds of games and sports and drinking all kinds of stuff and having fun, and it's a whole show. So this is the kind of fun that Krishna and Arjuna used to have together. There's also quite a few depictions. There's one section where Sanjaya goes to speak to Krishna and Arjuna, and they both sit in on the same bed, and their legs are intertwined. That's how close they are. Um, so they were very close, Krishna and Arjuna. Um, so that's kind of his relation with some of these things. So let's get a little into his appearance. Arjuna was a little bit shorter than Krishna. Krishna was considered kind of tallish. Arjuna was a little shorter than him. They're not. I'm not. Some people say, "Oh, he was, this taller." That they're not specifically. They're not. They don't give specific measurements anywhere. But what they do talk about is Krishna's a little taller than Arjuna. Arjuna's taller than Nakula and Sahadev. Uh, Yudhisthira's taller than Krishna, and Bhima's taller than everybody. Um, he was called Bibatsu, which means terrifying. Um, but he's also described as being handsome as Cupid, and sometimes it says it looks like the creator spent a little extra time in making him. So he might have been scary looking when he was fighting, but he also was extremely handsome. That goes along with the Uttar Falguni characteristics. And a lot of those other things I described earlier. That would be the moon in Leo, which gives you that kind of warrior nature. Um, when he was born as from the Shakti or Amsha of Indra. So Indra is a total playboy, and nobody can deny that. So um, Arjuna must have been extremely handsome. They described that his hair was curly. I don't necessarily think that's. I think that's just like what we might call these days wavy or somewhat curly. Um, his hair is also described as being blackish in a few places, and that goes along with his mother, who was considered to have very dark hair and very light skin, which was considered beautiful in those days. Um, let's see. Arjuna had several different kinds of coats of armor. Sometimes it's described as being solid gold, sometimes solid silver, and sometimes black with gold leaf patterns. Um, and so it would appear, he had different kinds of coats of armor for different kinds of occasions. Um, so let's get a little bit into his birth, right? So the background of Arjuna, let's get a little bit into his birth and how it all came about. Um, I'm gonna give a little bit of a summary here. I mean, you got to know a little bit where he's coming from, but the Mahabharata. How far back do you want to go, right? There's a lot of people, are used to the TV show or whatever, and they start with Shantanu. That's like 400 pages in to the book, right? So there's a lot of descriptions of the different lineage of. They're all descended from King Yayati and Nahusha. Nahusha was the father of Yayati, and so they describe all this lineage from Pururava, which is the split comes with Yayati. One was Puru and one was Yadu. So the Puru was the youngest son and Yadu was the oldest. And Yadu would have inherited the kingdom, but Yayati wanted to restore his youth, so he did a switch and he asked all his sons, but none of them wanted to give it. So until the youngest, which was Puru, so the throne passed to the younger son, the youngest son. And so all that, the king line descended from there. Shantanu was born into Bharat was born into that. He was one of the more famous sons of that lineage. And also Kuru, who came a few generations later. That's why another name they're called the Kauravas. What happened with Kuru was the Panchalyas, which was a neighboring kingdom, had stolen Hastinapur. They all had to run away to Rajasthan. And Kuru was actually born in Rajasthan. And he he gathered together their forces and took back the kingdom. So he's considered to be one of their great ancestors. The ancestral home, let's say. They divided the land up into different kingdoms that they had sway over. They tried to, grow it and stuff, but there's certain, things that were considered inherited territories. So eventually we get to Shantanu and then Bheeshma, who was his son. Well, his name was Devarata, but Shantanu wanted to marry again, but the father wouldn't allow it because there might be some kind of controversy. So Devarata took a vow that he won't have any kids, so he was called Bheeshma, which means terrible vow. So Shantanu had two more kids, Chitravira, who was killed by a Gandharva of the same name, who just didn't like the fact that they shared a name. Gandharvas can be a little bit proud. And then Chitravira, who he was more of a lover than a fighter, let's say, and he couldn't actually. Bheeshma ended up having to take. In those days, they used to have what was called swayamvaras, which means a woman's choice, and it's a good way of ensuring strong genetics. Actually, what they used to do was they would have a tournament and maybe some different kinds of feats to show the practice or the strength of the hero. And then a girl would choose somebody, and usually the way it ended up was all the other suitors would challenge the guy, and he would have to fight them and defeat them, and whoever won the tournament would get to win the girl. So that's actually a very good way of controlling genetics and making sure that only the strongest get to breed and have children. And I mean, it's honest that as long as you're not looking at it with some kind of prejudice, you actually that's what they were trying to do, and it's a good way of having strong generations. So they used to have these swayamvaras. Now what happened was Vichitravira was more of a lover than a fighter, and Bheeshma was like, if this kid goes there, he's gonna die. The thing is that maybe you people. Many Indian people will know this, but some Western people won't. When a woman gets married, they part the hair, and they put this red mark, sindoor, they call it. It's the red. They take the turmeric and you heat it to a certain temperature, it becomes red. That's the old way they used to make it. These days they add dyes and stuff, but in a certain period they would. So that's a mark of a woman being married, and where that actually comes from is after the Swayamvaras, they used to get the blood off of the sword and put it on the part of the hair. That's where the sindoor comes from. So Bheeshma was quite worried that Vichitravirya would be killed if he went to one of these Swayamvaras. So he took it upon himself, being the older brother, that he would just go there and deal with it because he was pretty much invincible. So, long story short, Bheeshma goes there, defeats all the suitors, runs away with the girls. It was a really quick deal. He tells them that he's there to challenge them. They draw their weapons. He knocks all the weapons out of their hands and the crowns off their heads and stacks them in a neat little row at the feet of the king who's holding the ceremony. Everybody kind of sits down and is like, well, we're fucked. So the Bheeshma just rides up and the girls get thrown on the chariot. Unfortunately, so one guy is following them and his name is Shalya. So Shalya is chasing them. Now this happens also to be the same Shalya that is fighting with Krishna and Dwarka in later stories. He uses a kind of a spaceship or some kind of a weapon that can fly in the sky and dump lightning bolts and explosive weapons. That's a whole other story later we can cover. But this is the same Shalya when he's younger. So he's Shalva, that's his name, Shalva. So this is the same Shalva. So Shalva is chasing Bheeshma. Sorry about that. It's Shalva, not Shalya. Yeah, sometimes the names can get a little bit confusing, especially when it's not separated by too many letters. So Shalva is chasing Bheeshma. Bheeshma totally humiliates him in battle because Bheeshma is the best. So he knocks the weapons out of his hand, comes up and knocks him on the head with the horn of his bow as a sign of contempt, and tells him little kids shouldn't play with men, and off he goes. So there's this whole controversy because Amba wants to marry Shalva. So Bheeshma's like, well, we can't force you into anything you don't want to do. So that should let you know a little something about the honor of the people back in those days. These modern ideas of these bride burnings and all this crap is just total Kali Yuga bullshit. So the girl didn't want to marry, so they're like, we can't tell you who to marry. It's called a Swayambara for a reason. It means the woman gets to choose who she wants to marry. So she went to Shalva, but he didn't want nothing to do with her because he was humiliated. So his pride was hurt, so he didn't want to know what to do. So there's this whole thing. So Vichitravirya, long story short, Vichitravirya marries two queens. Back in those days, polygamy was a common thing, especially amongst the Kshatriya class. Polygamy was pretty normal. Polyandry was, that's a woman with more than one husband, was a little bit frowned upon. That was unusual. So Vichitravirya was married to Ambika and Ambalika, who were the younger sisters. Amba was the oldest. Unfortunately, Vichitravirya was of a weak constitution, and he basically, for lack of better words, had too much sex with these beautiful girls and got himself sick and died. Must have, yeah, he was of a weak constitution already, and he's too much engaged in enjoying these beautiful girls, and even though he had so much sex with them, didn't get them pregnant. So then he died childless, so nobody really knew what to do. So they asked Bheeshma to impregnate the girls, but no go. He didn't want to do it. He denied it. Now, Bheeshma is an interesting character in the sense he's pretty hard-headed when it comes to almost everything he does. I guess that gives him some kind of, stubborn. It's a admirable character. It's an admirable trait. That is good there, but it does get in the way of the ultimate goal, and we'll see how that comes around. But so there was a secret. So Satyavati was the mother of Gada and Vichitravira. So she had a secret son named Vyasa. So he's the writer of the story, by the way. So he makes a key appearance in this particular section. She asked him to impregnate the girls because if it's, in those days, if a brother dies before he impregnates a woman, uh, then the brother can come and do the duty for him, so that the line can continue. So they told the girls, your husband's older brother is going to come. So unfortunately, they assumed that the girl assumes that Bheeshma is going to come. Because in those days, different mothers, they'd still call them the same family. It's an ancient tradition. It's still used in India a lot. Even though it's not really your mother, you still say my mother, my brother, etc., etc. Stepbrother is still called brother. Stepmother is still called mother. So they just assumed that Bhishma was going to come, but it wasn't. It was Vyasa, and he had just come back from doing super severe austerities, and he didn't really look too good. So this beautiful princess girl who's used to certain standards, sees this hermit with dreadlocks and black colored skin, and she kind of freaks out and closes her eyes. Vyasa is insulted by this and curses that the baby will be born blind. So Satyavati can't handle this, and it's like, well, we can't have a blind king, so you gotta do the other. You gotta go for the other girl now. So she goes with him, and she says, "Don't, whatever you do, don't close your eyes." So Balika, she gets a little bit. She says, "Well, she doesn't close her eyes, but she gets scared by the way that he looks, being unused to someone that looks like him. So she becomes pale from fright. So he says that, again, he's somewhat offended and says that the baby will be born pale. So some people have taken this to mean that he was born albino, and it may be possible. So then Pandu was born. Um, so he was born, he was called Pandu because Pandu means pale. So the blind child was born, was named Dhritarashtra. We'll get into that when we get to Dhritarashtra. There's some interesting stories about him and how he all came to be. He's considered to be a Gandharva leader. So Pandu, Pandu ended up marrying two queens. One was Kunti and one was Madri. Pandu was a very rambunctious youth and a very powerful warlord. He reconquered some of the realms that had been lost their power when there was no king in Hastinapur. And a lot of the feudal lords that were kind of rebellious, he put them in check. This seems to be a common theme with the behavior of Kshatriyas. They fought just for the sake of it. They like to fight. They like to kill, and they like to not care if they got killed. And they would do it all the time, basically. That's the way it's presented, and that's the way I'm telling it. So Pandu was also a enthusiastic hunter, which makes a lot of sense if you're kind of a warlord. You're going to want to get your skills up. So it's good to practice your archery, and also the only kind of deer that they actually hunted back in those days was a black deer that the rishis in those days used to use as they used to wear deer hide, and some would keep a deer hide. It was a particular kind of deer called the black renku deer, which may or may not be extinct. I'm not exactly certain what kind of deer it is. There's some debate about the issue. But they're called the black renku deer. And basically, the reason that they would keep the deer skin was the smell of it after it was cured was they thought, and it may be true, that the snakes didn't like the smell and would keep away. Now, the rishis used to do this intense tapasya and kind of be blocked out from their awareness. So when they are doing the meditation and leaving their body, if you sit in a cave, there's all kinds of, you could get bit by a snake. There's all kinds of dangers. So what they used to do was lay down some mats and put the renku deer skin over it, and then they would meditate on top of the renku deer skin to keep the snakes away. Also, you could use it as a sleeping bag or whatever, keep the snakes away. So the thing is that the Kshatriyas used to hunt those deer and give the deer skins as kind of like presence, let's say, to the rishis. Punya keeps the wheels going. The very enthusiastic with the punya, or punya means good karma, or good deeds. So the kings really thought, and most of society at that time thought, and I believe it's true, if you do a lot of punya, it kind of keeps the wheels of trade, business, wealth, prosperity kind of turning. So they used to like to give, presents to the rishis and sages in order to make the punya more plurific. So they used to, so it's a good thing they used to do. Another thing that they used to do is to kill rhinos. The main reason you kill rhinos is they used to go and, rhinos take it as their responsibility. They hate fire, especially at night. Now, the rishis used to sit around the fire. They do yajnas all the time. Purifies the atmosphere. There's other reasons. Science has proven that it's very good against radiation and other ill effects, so it's pretty interesting stuff. So the rishis are kind of in danger if you're in the forest and you're making fires all the time, because these giant rhinos run in there and they just try and put it out. It's very dangerous, actually. So they used to hunt the rhinos to keep their populations within reasonable limits and give them a little bit of fear of man so that the rishis would be safe. Another thing that they used to do, was kill other dangerous animals. Generally, that was the kind of hunting, tigers. Even recently, there was a king named Jai Singh in Jaipur, was called the last Mahabharata. He was apparently very tall and very powerful. I happened to see his gun one time. It was about 10 feet long. It was practically a cannon. So he used to go out in the jungle and kill tigers with a knife and a shield, which is, you gotta be pretty brave. It was almost ritualistic at that point to kill, the animals, and the king is doing this duty of controlling nature. So in those days, especially, there's very prolific wild animal infestations, and so the kings used to keep the animals at bay for the rishis. So Pandu was a Pandu was a very prolific hunter, and he went hunting one time, and he saw two deer mating, and so he popped one, and it turned out that the deer actually was a rishi, who, because they were living out in the wild, he couldn't really have sex with his wife out in the open without being considered immoral or wrong. So he took the form of animals, because animals can have sex out in the open and nobody really cares. So they did that for that reason. So the rishi was dying, and he said, it's the rule that you're not supposed to hunt an animal while he's mating, because it's taking unfair advantage. So I curse you that next time you have sexual relations with your wife, you'll die. So that's kind of bad for Pandu because he hasn't had a kid yet. So he kind of doesn't know what to do. He's worried. Uh, so they come up with different ideas. Maybe his wife should have sex with the rishis. Some different ideas come out, and finally Kunti says, "Well, I actually have this boon that I can summon the deities at will." So he's like, "Well, hell, if I'm gonna have somebody replace me as the father, might as well use the devas, right?" So then they start summoning the different devas or gods. So the first deity that Pandu chose to impregnate Kunti was Yama or Dharma, because he thought that his first son was going to become king. So he chose the god of virtue so that the root of his kingdom would be based in virtue or dharma. So then the second son, he wanted to be strong in order to protect and uphold dharma. So he chose Vayu, who's considered to be the strongest. Next, he wanted to obtain a son who would be, according to some interpretations, a great bhakta, and in others, the best of people. So he chose Indra. Both of those can actually mean the same thing in a sense. He chose Indra, who was considered to be one of the greatest because he did so many yagyas, immeasurable might, energy, power, glory. So, in order to appease Indra, no other deity actually they did any kind of austerity to summon, but in order to summon Indra, they did tapasya. So for that, they did austerity for one whole year, and then Kunti asked for Indra to come. So Arjuna was the son resulting of that. He was born in the month of Falgun under the star of Falgun, which would be around end of December, beginning of January in the Western calendar. Um, at that time, around 3221 BC. So, different kinds of different kinds of demigods and devas and upadevas came to witness the birth. And so I'm just going to read a little thing that kind of gets across what was the benedictions that were spoken. So this is the Mahabharata Adi section 123, verse 34 to 45. As soon as this child was born, an incorporeal voice, loud and deep as the clouds and filling the whole sky, directly said, addressing Kunti, "This child of yours, O Kunti, will be equal unto Kartavirya in energy and Shiva in prowess, invincible like Shakra," that's the name for Indra, means the powerful, himself. He will spread your fame far and wide. As Vishnu, the youngest son of Aditi, has enhanced Aditi's joy, so shall this child enhance your joy. Subjugating the Madras, the Kurus, along with the Somakas, and the people of Chedi, Kashi, and Karusha, he will maintain the prosperity of the Kurus, again will derive great gratification from the fat of all creatures dwelling in the Kanda of a forest, to be burnt down by this mighty one's arms. O Agni will derive great gratification from the fat of all creatures dwelling in the Kanda of a forest, to be burnt down by the might of this one's arms. The mighty hero vanquishing all the effeminate monarchs of the earth will with his brothers perform three great sacrifices. In prowess, O Kunti, he will be even as Parshuram or Vishnu. The foremost of all men, endured with prowess, he will achieve great fame. He will gratify in battle by his heroism Shankara, the god of gods, Mahadeva, and will receive him from him great weapons named Pashupata. This, your son of mighty arms, will also slay uh, at the command of Indra those Daityas called the Nivata Kavachas, which means literally air-proof armor, who are the enemies of the gods. He will also acquire all kinds of celestial weapons, and this bull among men will also retrieve the fortunes of his race. I think that might be a kind of way of indicating that his son's son will become the king. So that's a little bit of the benedictions that the gods gave unto Arjuna. So Arjuna was out of all of them, he's the one that got the most benedictions and blessings. There's not many descriptions of his babyhood, and he doesn't really show up again until later on. Pandu gets swayed by Madri and ends up dying. Madri goes into the funeral pyre with him, and Kunti is left with the 5 sons. She then goes down into Hastinapur. This is something interesting which I find. The Pandavas spent their whole childhood, well, early childhood, growing up in the mountains, outside of cities. The only kind of people they met were rishis. Very different than the Kurus, actually, So, after Pandu dies, they go to the capital city, Hastinapur, where their cousins, the sons of Dhritarashtra, known as the Kauravas, are. So there's 100 of them. There's a whole story with that. Dhritarashtra had a wife named Gandhari. She became pregnant before Yudhisthira was born, but the baby stayed in her womb for a long time, and then Yudhisthira was born, and still baby didn't come, so she hit her stomach in anger. They make a big deal about how wonderful Gandhari is, but she wasn't, sorry. She hits her stomach in anger and pretty much aborts the baby. Baby falls out. It's a ball of flesh. So Vyasa appears on the scene and separates little chunks of flesh and puts them in pots and tells her to wait, and they'll pull out babies. So, test tube baby, I guess, or clay pot baby. So a year later, they open the pots at the same time that Bheema was born, actually. And it's very funny, but Duryodhan and the Kurus, well, I think they opened up one pot a day. So Duryodhan's pot was opened the same day that Bheema was born, the same day that Balaram was born, and the same day that Kichaka was born. There must have been some kind of astrology for super strong people on that day, because all of those people are considered to be extremely strong, and they were all born on the same day. So those were the 100 Kauravas that had a kind of bizarre, at the very least, bizarre birth. Some kind of test tube baby. So they were there for a bit, and Duryodhan was a rotten scoundrel from the start and tried to kill Bheema. Now, Bheema was a rambunctious youth, let's say, and he would beat up on his cousins. A little bit mean, a bit too hard. But Duryodhan, he just went overkill. And anybody that tries to make the excuse that Bhima was mean, so he killed him, you need to get a psychological evaluation. Um, Duryodhan tried to kill Bhima, but it kind of backfired, and Bhima ended up getting this nectar that made him strong as 10,000 elephants. He already was super strong, but this just made him insanely strong. And after that, Bheeshma and Kripa were Kripa was teaching them. Kripa was the son of Sardwat. We'll cover him eventually. He was very powerful. Sardwat was a rishi who obtained all kinds of celestial weapons. And the gods actually feared him, so they sent an Apsara. He didn't see her, he just smelled her. He passed semen. Must have smelled pretty nice. Um, the semen fell on the grass. He felt embarrassed and left. It produced a baby due to the idea that he was celibate for years, if not hundreds of years, and so his potency came out as the baby. So Dronacharya was born motherless. And Dronacharya actually he had twins. It was Kripa and Kripi. And Kripi ended up marrying Dronacharya. And this is about when Drona comes. Drona appeared, showed some skill to the kids. Ball fell down the well, so he used some mantras and different things to get the ball out and a ring. And so they made him their military guru. Arjuna was totally dedicated to Drona. Drona is an interesting character. Bhima didn't like him. Bhima kind of saw through a lot of the bullcrap and kind of saw that Drona was a money hound and was looking to get some revenge with these kids, and he didn't really consider him to be a great teacher. Bhima preferred to take the Balaram as his teacher. Uh, Arjuna, however, he was totally down with Drona. He just saw him as, I guess, his father died young. Drona was kind of foster father for Arjuna. Of all the characters, you kind of see this father-son relationship between Drona and Arjuna. So he was like the pet disciple of Drona. And when he was killed later on, Arjuna had a total hissy fit. Um, so there's some famous stories involved with that. Very closely followed his, orders of his guru, different kinds of things. He used to tell the kids to get water, so he gave them all very thin-necked pots, but he would give his son a fat-necked pot so he could give him special instructions. Um, and so Arjuna used to use a water weapon and fill the pot up quickly so that he could also get the special lessons. Arjuna, as I mentioned before, others were sleeping. He used to use his skills. The way he got that was that he was eating food at night and the candle went out. And so he was like, "Oh, it's dark, but I can still eat." Because he knew where the food was and he knew where his mouth was. He just, So he's like, "Wow, if I can eat without seeing, I can shoot without seeing." So he started practicing shooting his bow at night. That really impressed Drona. There's a famous scene where they took it's either a live bird or a fake bird. Model bird kind of makes a little more sense. So, Drona called his students forth and told them to aim at the bird and asked them what they saw. And the students responded, describing the environment, the other pupils, Drona, etc. And Drona would be displeased, tell them to go. And then finally he asked Arjuna to come forth, and he asked Drona, "What do you?" Drona asks Arjuna, "What do you see?" Arjuna says, "I just see the eye of the bird." And so then Drona's happy and says shoot, and he hits the eye of the bird. So this is a lesson about if you have a target, only see that target. So these are some of the stories. Eventually, the kids were trained up, so Drona decided to have a display. So the different they were going to show their skills. They had made some investment, let's say, in Dronacharya, so he wanted to show the kingdom, what they had put their investment in. So they built an arena, kind of like a coliseum, and everyone was invited to see the different kinds of things. It started off with Bheema and Duryodhana fighting, but it got to be so intense that Ashwatthama had to stand in the middle and separate them. One thing about Ashwatthama, which most people aren't aware, is Ashwatthama is actually quite big. It's not really depicted in any of the cheesy Hindi movies, but Ashwatthama was about as big as Bheema or Duryodhana. He's a big guy. Rice milk or not, he is a big guy. He is very thick, very strong. They described this. They said in three ways he was like a bull in his tread, which is his way he stepped, like a big bull. In his voice, which was very deep, and in his neck. So he was very powerful guy. Not necessarily as big as Bheema per se, but a lot bigger than they usually depict him as some scrawny little kid. So after the battle, after Bheema and Arjuna, after Bheema and Duryodhana were sparring, and it got too intense, and Ashwatthama kind of got in the way. They separated them, and Arjuna came out, and he was displaying. He was the main attraction. He's displaying shooting arrows through spinning rings, various moving targets, including a mechanical boar. So they had automatons at that time. Then displayed various, celestial weapons and how, you'd make fire and then make water and do different kinds of things. And everyone was extremely impressed. And then, at this time, Karna comes forth and challenges Arjuna. Now, what you have to understand is this would be about as stupid and arrogant as somebody, going to the Olympics and who didn't register and competing. It's really dumb. I really think you got to be pretty stupid to justify what Karna did here. It was arrogant. It was stupid. It was totally uncalled for. So Bheema made fun of him. He had a short temper. He's protective of his brother, so he started making fun of him. A lot of the things that he said and did, they were uncalled for, but they were just a response to the arrogant and boastful behavior of Karna. So, I'm sorry, but I think it was perfectly justified. When it was discovered, he was a sutta. Bheema said some pretty hardcore things. He said, what are you doing carrying a bow? You should get a shovel so you can, scoop up all the horse shit, different stuff like that. So Duryodhana was like, nah, this guy's got some skills. I want him to be on my side. So he said, well, he definitely he was a Kshatriya. There's no doubt about that. And I think you have to be blind not to see it. But what Bheema was doing was, in my opinion, just kind of giving Karna what he gave out because he could. So Duryodhana took sides with Karna, and he promoted him as the king of Anga. So that is East India. Most people think it's part of like Bengal and part of Bihar, kind of like where Jambu and Kush, not Jambu, Jharkhand is, something like that. Possibly there. It's a little bit vague, but they know it's East India, near Bengal. So that's where they think that he was made. They gave him that kingdom. Kind of promoted him because they wanted him on their side. And so it's a beautiful scene. Arjuna is standing there with his bow drawn. Karna has his bow drawn. They're going to fight. Uh, Beautiful clouds roll in. Storms only appear in certain seasons. So if there's an uncalled for storm, that's got to be something else. Uh, it's not like, in the Western countries we get rain when it feels like it. But there it's very particular times when it will rain. So big, huge storm comes out of nowhere. That must have been something. Thunderbolts, lightning, rainbows appear. Everyone's amazed. Then the clouds start to darken the sky. It's Indra's Shakti. And then all of a sudden the sun becomes bright and melts away the clouds and makes a bright spot over Karna. Beautiful, poetic description. But then, they get in the way. It's not time to fight. They try and stop him from fighting because he could be pretty deadly at that point. And because the other thing is, Drona has a mission. Now, Drona was raised as a poor, after you get taught, you're supposed to give dakshin, which is, your payment for the teaching. So Drona asked his pupils to capture Drupada, the king of Panchala. Now, there's several interpretations to this. The story goes that Drona was raised by, Drona was a poor Brahmin who got some weapons, and they both went to school together, him and Drupada, and when they were kids, Drupada comes over and says, hey, when we grow up, we can share the kingdom. So Dronacharya is poor, and he has his poor lactose-deprived Ashwatthama, who can't get his milk, and so he goes to Drupad and begs him for the kingdom. Half the kingdom, says, hey, when we were kids, you said we. And Drona's like, Drupad is like, come on, dude, we were kids. Kids make a lot of statements. So he throws him away. Dronacharya is insulted. That doesn't score high marks for me as far as character, if you ask me. But that isn't too Brahminical, if you ask me. But so then he raises these kids so that he can take his half the kingdom. Some people have interpreted this, that this was just a pretense, and that Drona was took on by the Kurus so they could take half the kingdom from the Panchalas, because there was a kind of rivalry between the two. It's possible. So, now this is interesting. The Kurus and Karna, mind you, go in there and they fight Drupada and they get their ass kicked and thrown out of the city. Karna was there and he got beat. And it was 100 Kurus, including Duryodhan. But Arjuna and Bheema only. Arjuna fought with Drupada, and Bheema fought with everybody else. And that's why he's called Bhimasena. He's a one-man army. So Drona alone, Arjuna alone is fighting. It's a fast day today, sorry. Arjuna is fighting Drupada alone. And he took him out when the Kauravas and Karna couldn't. So that's just one indication. In my mind, there's several where Arjuna does what Karna can't. So a lot of this Karna fanboyism, it has its roots in several factors. When we get into Karna, I'm going to expose it entirely. But it's very misplaced and totally orchestrated by Indian politics, basically. And that's what it's become. The Karna is the low-caste hero used for getting votes for certain political parties in India, and that's the scheme. So, identity politics, kind of in India nonsense, used for political motives. That's basically what Karna is utilized as in these days. The thing is, oh, he's the poor Sutta. What people don't realize is that a Sutta is a Dvija caste, which is a combination of a Brahmin and a Kshatriya, and they're actually considered higher than a Vaishya. And so, yeah, that's not a low caste. If he actually was a low caste, they might have an argument, but he's not. So that's total nonsense. So Arjuna wins, and Drupada is defeated, handily. And Drupad's like, then, Drona comes forth and says, now I have your kingdom, but because you're my friend, I'll give you half. So, because Arjuna was such a badass, Drupada has the desire, like, it's funny. He gets humiliated, but he's thinking, dude, this guy's strong. I want to have him on my side. So he decides that he wants to take Arjuna as his son-in-law, right? He can't beat him, join him. So, Drupad decides to have Arjuna as his son-in-law. So he can, he's sitting, tries to convince some Brahmins to do a sacrifice that would give him a daughter that would marry Arjuna, as well as a son that would kill Drona. So when I cover Drupada, I'll get more into the details about the sacrifice, and there's a lot of different exploits. There's two brothers, one wants to do it, and how he convinces them to do it. But that doesn't necessarily connect to the story that I'm trying to tell here. So I'm going to do that a lot with these, focus more on the particulars and how it relates to the individual characters. But I want to cover at least 10 or 12 of the main characters, if not more, we can cover. There's a lot of characters in this. So he does this, sacrifice, and so he obtains, they get it together, the sacrificial arena. These fire sacrifices are quite elaborate things. It's I've heard it compared almost to modern day chemistry. Except it's on a metaphysical level, and sometimes they last many days. There's certain kinds of arcane and magical practices in the West which are somewhat similar, but this is way more. I'll put it. It's not as intense as those other kinds of things. So you had, as a result, they're doing the sacrifice, and the thing is that his wife is supposed to eat the. There's certain oblations that the wife is supposed to eat, but she can't eat it if she's impure, and she's had like a snack or something, and so she couldn't eat it. So they just threw it in the fire, and so that's why Draupadi and Drishtadyumna are born from the fire. So first came out was a son who was born fully grown, walked out of the fire fully grown, a youth, with sword and armor. It's a pretty amazing sight, you know. Most people don't realize that, and it's funny because Dronacharya was also born not of woman, so someone who kills him is not born of woman. This is a common motif actually in ancient Indo-European stories. A man can only be killed. People are like immortal if they're not born of woman, and it's a common kind of a symbology or story that's retold. You see that a lot. Um, and then Draupadi is born. She is extremely beautiful. She smelled like a blue lotus. Now, the blue lotus, the word they use, it translated into is lotus, but we actually call it water lilies these days. Um, It's a blue water lily. They have them in uh, Egypt as well as a very powerful and potent symbol. Um, I knew a agriculturalist, and he actually grew them, and so I got to smell them, and they are amazingly intoxicating. Uh, the smell is just it is amazing. So apparently, they said that you could smell this smell from her up to a mile away, and she smelled like a blue lotus. Her skin was the same color as a blue lotus. She's extremely beautiful, very emotional woman. Um, but her caste, is Kshatriya, and they say that a Kshatriya, it's often described that a Kshatriya woman is like a thunder cloud, um, soft on the outside, and the core is like thunder or like lightning, hard as lightning. Very emotional too. I mean, the tempestuousness of a storm is also present there. This is the way they oftentimes will describe. Uh, Throughout the story, there's a lot of different kinds of things that happen. Oftentimes, her reactions are extremely emotional. And the thing is, it's not. This isn't downplaying her. It's just her nature. And so the thing is that um, it's a uh, it's like an ornament to her character. These days, people try and restrict emotions or doubt or say, "Oh, those silly emotional women." Hey, this whole MGTOW thing, it's disgusting. Actually, these people don't understand women, so then they they have adverse and insane reactions to something that's just part of feminine nature. Uh, it's not so good. Um, so this is just her nature, and she's embrace your nature. We all have affinities and natures. Some people aren't like that. There's some women that are more masculine in nature. There's some men that are more feminine. You just have to, if you're gonna be something, you don't try and pretend to be something that you're not. That's all I'm saying. Um, so Draupadi was an extremely emotional person. So Drupad is hoping to have Arjuna marry her, but unfortunately, at this time, simultaneously, while Drupad is doing this, the Pandavas, they get stuck in this house of lack. This is something I'll cover more with when I cover Bhima, because he features more prominently in that story. But Arjuna was there, and uh, they sent him over to this house of lack. This is all Dhritarashtra's scheme, by the way. Um, this is all him doing this. He's not innocent in the least. This is all his idea. They stick him, bring him over to the house of lack, catch it on fire. Vidura gets word of this, warns you to steer. Bhima can't handle it. They dig a well. They dig a escape tunnel. Bhima gets tired of it. Is the more accurate description. Bhima's tired of the whole show, and just decides, hey, if they want to burn us in the middle of the night, why don't we just be preemptive? Because they got some spy with them that's going to do the deed. So he lights the house on fire, and they all run away. So everyone thinks that they've been killed. So Drupada is like sad. So he decides to hold a tournament, and with a test, right? Which would be so difficult that only Arjuna or someone with the same skill level could win. But the Pandavas hadn't been killed, and so they went. There's a few more stories. They run away into the forest. Bhima kills some demons. Uh, gets married. Some time passes while this is all going on, and so Jupiter arranges for this one. They find out about it later, and because they're disguised as Brahmins to hide, and so the Brahmins travel a lot, from place to place, and so they're sitting around the fire and they get word like, oh, there's this be this huge sacrifice. So it's just kind of like nowadays, like, oh, there's this Rath Yatra going on or this thing and some event. You got to go. It's like the new big thing. This festival or this kind of they have like a music festival or something. Oh, let's go. That kind of mood. So you got to go, and they hear about it, and they're like, yeah, he wanted his daughter to marry Arjuna, but since he died, he put up this thing together so that someone with the same skill. So Arjuna hears this, he said, yeah, she's the most beautiful girl. They hear all this stuff, so Arjuna's intrigued, and he wants to go. So they all head over there to the capital of the Panchalas. So the thing is, India is a big country, and it takes a while. You send out an invitation, it takes a while for everyone to show up. This is pre-cars and all that stuff. So it takes a while for everyone to show up when you send out an invitation. So, there's several weeks to months of preparation. Everyone's just kind of waiting for everyone to show up. And so if you showed up early, they set up like an arena, kind of like a coliseum type thing. For some reason in these Hindi movies, it's always indoors. I don't get it. It was an outdoor arena. Anyway, so the thing is that so they built this huge outdoor arena, and they would have like jugglers and musicians and performers and mimes and the whole business, all the street show kind of thing going on in the arena, kind of as this entertainment while people are waiting. And these kind of events are big. I mean, it's described that in order to host the event, Drupad built palaces for every one of the kings that was in attendance, because that was you can imagine, like, he's building houses for all the people that are coming to visit his kingdom. And there's hundreds and thousands of kings that are coming to visit. It's extraordinary, actually, when you think about the amount of effort and money spent on this kind of stuff. And they built pavilions and things and pandals and all kinds of stuff is going on. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other people are just showing up just to see, you know. And there's probably all kinds of street vendors. It's a whole party scene, No wonder everyone's coming, right? So everyone's showing up. The Pandavas show up, and they decide to stay to kind of shack up in the house of a potter, a merchant type person. And so they stay there and they go and visit. So finally, on the day of, everybody, they have different kinds of entertainment. Finally, they bring out some musicians that are playing some very beautiful, soft, sweet music, and everyone starts to kind of calm down because everyone's talking kind of, and then they play the soft music, and everyone kind of wants to hear. So everyone starts to kind of be quiet, and then Drishtadyumna walks out, and he makes the announcement that they set up the target, which was it's a fish on a wheel that's spinning, and on the bottom there's a pond of water. So you have to look into the water and aim at the fish that's spinning around and hit it with the bow. And not only that, you have to be able to string the bow. And this is something which Madhvacharya focuses on, which is, according to him, no one was even able to string the bow. Now, according to Madhvacharya, Drupada put a kind of, for lack of a better word, a spell on the bow that only someone with the same Shakti as Indra could string it. And because Arjuna was the Amsha of Indra, that is why he did that. So none of the kings was able to even string the bow, because Indra is the second only to Lord Shiva. In the Tartamya, which is a list of powers in the Yajurveda. So the thing is that nobody was able to string the bow, including Karna even. He got the closest. Surya is very powerful, but that's the way he describes it. They don't go into that much detail in the Mahabharata itself. What they do, there's two versions. Now, in one part, everybody agrees nobody was able to hit the target or even go for it. The Krishna Dharma one really flubs this whole business up. It's a common misconception that Karna wasn't allowed to participate, but that's only in certain versions of the Mahabharata. There's other versions in which, and this is I'll get to this. Arjuna, when Arjuna gets all the kings try to hit the target, but nobody can. And Arjuna stands up and says, "Can Brahman participate?" Because this is for kings, right? Now, while Brahman is a higher caste than a king, Brahmins can't participate in warfare, or at least they're not supposed to, which is one of the major reasons Bheema was very fed up with Dronacharya. So Arjuna stands up, and everyone's dressed as a Brahmin, right? So Arjuna says, "Can a Brahmin participate?" So this is what Drishtajumna says. Now this is in a South Indian version, and this makes the most sense to me. Drishtajumna says, "It doesn't matter what caste you are, as long as you can string the bow and hit the target, you can win the princess." So that makes sense. This was the qualification, as long as you were equal to Arjuna. Arjuna is superior to Karna, and I'm going to keep on pointing out the instances. This is one perhaps contended example, but there's about 5 or 6 more where Arjuna handily defeats Karna on all levels. So that's why I'm going to say here, it makes total sense Karna got to participate and he flubbed it up. So Arjuna, eventually, none of the kings all try and they can't even string the bow. This has parallelisms to the Rama story. So finally, Arjuna stands up, "Can I participate?" Arjuna says, "As long as you can string the bow and hit the target, then it doesn't matter what caste you are." So Arjuna stands up. Some people try and stop him. Some other people are they're like, "Oh, you just make insult the Brahmins." You always have then it goes on to say, people with more transcendental vision could see that he was more than qualified, and they said, "Be quiet, let him go." This always happens, by the way. You get people that think they're spiritual, and they're really not, and they try and say things that are smart, and unfortunately it doesn't happen. And then you get people that have transcendental vision and kind of readdress the problems. So he has the Shakti of Indra. So many people are just concentrated just on the externals and don't pay attention to the internals. And that's unfortunately very rampant in Kali Yuga. But even then, you can see, there's so-called spiritualists that don't know anything, even in the Vedic age. So Arjuna goes down there, and according to Madhvacharya, it was a rather quick deal. He just walks up, strings the bow, gets down on one knee, looks into the pond, and whoosh, one shot, like lickety split, really. I know in a lot of the movies and stuff, they make it all tense for drama and whatnot, but according to Madhvacharya, and I mean, they don't really have any timing emphasized, let's say, in the Mahabharata itself, but according to Madhvacharya, it's all one kind of like quick go. So then he gets his bow, fires, wins. Draupadi, everyone's surprised, everyone's shocked. For a while, no one says anything. Draupadi kind of walks out with a flower garland of roses and puts it around Arjuna's neck. And then the Kshatriyas get mad, this is after being shocked, right? So they're like, oh my God, what happened? And then they start complaining because this is their logic. Well, by the way, Krishna and all the Yadus are there, and they don't participate on Krishna's direction because he understands that the Pandavas are there and that they're supposed to win Draupadi. So the Kshatriyas are mad. Majority of the Kshatriyas are mad, and the reason is because this is what they say. It's like, this is a beautiful Kshatriya woman, and you're just some beggar Brahmin. How are you going to take care of her? She has a lot of desires. They're basically their idea was this. This is why this is why intercaste marriages were kind of looked down on. Is basically, the way that this is a major problem these days in marriages and relationships, actually, is that, different families and groups have different traditions, right? And trying to weld those together creates a lot of chaos. There's a reason that divorce rate is 50% or more. And the thing is that, if two people are raised in a similar fashion with similar values, it makes it a lot easier and smoother in the marriage life, right? And that's why they did that. It's something to make things easier. And I mean, some people like things hard, right? Some people get a kick out of challenges, right? But this is just, this is a cultural thing from a bygone age. And this is the way that people used to think, well, make it as easy as possible, right? It kind of makes some sense, right? So they're like, this woman, she's raised to live in a palace. She's raised to a certain amount of enjoyments. She's raised to certain standards as far as certain things, and that's what she's going to expect. And you're just some itinerant Brahmin, and all Brahmins live based off of donations. This is the idea. They live off of the mercy of other people because they're in charge of all the valuable things. So their knowledge should be the knowledge. Brahmins are the astrologers. Brahmins are the lawyers. Brahmins are the priests. Brahmins are the doctors. These are all considered the indispensable things in the society, even today. The healthcare and all these things are considered to be valuable, essential things And this is the great debate of our modern civilization. Should it be free or whatever? Well, in those days, all of these things were the domain of the Brahmins, and they were supposed to live a life of poverty, or at least basically do everything that they do based on donation. So, by the way, all these astrologers that charge exorbitant amounts of money for their craft are not. I mean, I do astrology, and I can tell you something. I always ask for donations only, and because it's a God-given gift. I mean, some people. Let me tell you something. Artists, it's divinely inspired, but they have to work really, really hard. That skill is what some people call God-given gift is a lot of hard fucking work. But astrology, yeah, you have to learn it. But I'm going to tell you something, at least for me, it is, when I do astrology, I am channeling the powers of the universe. It is not me doing 90% of that stuff. Okay? That is God-given power. But so if you're channeling that kind of Shakti, it's not up to you to decide how much money you're going to make off of that. That's up to God, right? So that's the idea, and these Brahminical. It's a way of having a civilization or society in which the essential functions of the society are essentially available to everybody, and the rich are going to pay more because the idea is that Kshatriyas are always trying to outdo each other for how nice a donation they can give, right? But the poor people, they're going to be able to give what they can, and so the Brahmins are supposed to take it, and then the essential services are given. This is the way that it was. It's a good way. I mean, the Varnashram system is probably the most practical, realistic, and ideal way of running a society at the same time. Idealistic and realistic at the same time. It works. Trying to go from whatever hodgepodge barbarism is running the world now to that is perhaps a pipe dream, but it's a nice one. Uh, so the Kshatriyas are complaining, and they decide, then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all the Brahmins, anyway, but at this point, simultaneously, Bhima jumps off and grabs a monstrous tree and comes back standing next to Arjuna because it's about to get down. So Karna and all the Kshatriyas step forth, and all the Brahmins come too. And so they say, you can't insult the dignity of Brahmins. He won the girl fair and square. So all the Brahmins come with their staffs and deer skins. Yeah, all the Brahmins are described. It's like this. The Kshatriyas have swords and armor, and the Brahmins have their staffs and deerskin. This is kind of the way that it's described, like that's their armor or whatever. So the thing is that this is the thing in all these. This is another one of these sillinesses that people don't understand about the Vedic age. Every single one of those Brahmins had a deer skin that they kept, and then you get all these hippie ahimsa people. Anyway, it's silliness. So they're there, they're about to get in, about to throw down, and it's described that the Kshatriyas, they don't really want to kill these Brahmins, so they just kind of lightly play with them, so to speak, because they're trained in combat and also, I suppose, non-violent resistance or whatever. They don't really want to kill these Brahmins, but the Brahmins are challenging them, so they're just kind of like keeping them at bay, let's say. And then, Bhima and no, first, so Shalya, so Bhima jumps down and he has this huge tree, and Shalya steps forth because everyone's scared. Like, where did this guy come from? This monstrous Brahmin with this huge tree trunk that he's just holding in his hand. Probably like, 40, 60 feet long or something like that. And so Karna and Arjuna are dueling on the grounds there. And then Bheema has this giant tree, and Shalya steps forth, and Bheema swings it and crashes down on Shalya. And there's just giant smoke, and Shalya's just standing there. So they're fighting, and Arjuna and Karna are fighting, and it's going. And then Krishna, he stops it. And he says, we shouldn't really be fighting with these Brahmins. And the thing is that he definitely won. And we should allow this to happen. He's on it, obviously some kind of special person. And he should be able to take care of her. And, just like full moon, Krishna's always compared to moon in the stories. Just like how the full moon is considered to give cooling effect, right? So similarly, and actually they've done scientific tests, and this is actually true. You can look that up if you want to. Just as the full moon is supposed to give a cooling effect, so Krishna calmed down the wrath of the Kshatriyas and managed to evade the conflict of the situation. So they all go and let them all kind of walk off. And so I think, it's already probably about, let me think, it's probably already going to be about 2 hours. So I think this is a good place to stop for part 1. And I'm going to make a part 2 soon. And we'll make as many parts as we need to. We can do 2-hour segments. This might be 3 for all we know. I mean, I just got to the Swayamvara of Draupadi, and this is maybe, this is still the Adi Parva, by the way. Halfway through the Adi Parva. There's 18 in Mahabharata, so we're halfway through the first 18th of the book, and it's been 2 hours. So you can see how big this story is. This is probably about 2 hours, I think, but we'll see. Could be more. Could be 2. That would be. I want to do this dignity. I think it's at least going to be 3 parts. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.